All right, so today we will discuss Book 5 of Augustine's Confessions. Then on Wednesday, we will cover some related texts. On Friday, we will have, who signed up? Matt is you. All right, so we'll have Matt do the student-led conversation about Book 5 of the Confessions. So yeah, we're moving right along. We're almost at, we're not quite at halfway point this semester, but it feels like we're plugging right along. Yeah, I think we're expecting Grant back tomorrow. That's fine. Wednesday. All right, any questions? I saw a bunch of people sent me their one-page introductions with their theses. I didn't look at them yet, but I saw that they were emailed to me. They're good. So yeah, we'll keep moving right along. Maybe if we've got some time at the end of class, maybe we'll take a few minutes and discuss how those are progressing. So to start off, Book 5, Augustine's Confessions. Augustine, the Manichaean, he meets Faustus in this chapter. He gets substantially disillusioned with them. He takes a better teaching position in Rome. He's bad to his mom. He doesn't meet for the first time, but he has substantial interactions with St. Ambrose. Observations, thoughts, questions? What stood out to you in Book 5? Yeah, I struggle to distinguish between those two. I'm pretty sure he's mentioned before. I don't remember if he's met him before. Do you remember which bishop was it that Monica had interacted with before? Was that also Ambrose?
It was unnamed, I think.
Yeah, see, in my memory, that's also Ambrose, but if it's unnamed, it's probably not Ambrose. And the fact that Ambrose is in Rome makes it unlikely that he was also in North Africa, where he grew up. So, yeah, that's probably right. So this probably is where he meets Ambrose. So reactions, thoughts, what do you see?
I liked how when he kind of finally just made a big distinction, because he's been kind of hinting at not liking his rhetoric and getting more into the ideas of pursuing wisdom and philosophy. But when he's Faustus, and he notices how clever a speaker he is and how he's very eloquent with his speech. And then when he's like, in chapter 2, when he mentions it, before he meets Faustus, he says, does this mean he's like ahead of time knows that he's a good speaker but wants wisdom, or is that just kind of looking back? I'm not sure. But it is noticeable that he says he knows he doesn't care for eloquent speakers because he's kind of been around them his whole life.
Well, right. I mean, it's kind of like being a professor. It's like, yeah, let me introduce you to a guy who's a genius. Like, okay, I'll add him to the list. I mean, I've met some geniuses that were pretty horrible people. I mean, so, when you're in certain subcultures, different things impress you. And when you're surrounded by good rhetoricians all the time, better speaking is, yeah, all right, that was good, but so what? I mean, yeah. I mean, I often consider myself very lucky. I was mentored by a woman at St. Louis University who wasn't just a great scholar, but she was a pretty terrific human being as well. And I didn't realize at the time that those two things, it's harder to find, in academia, it's pretty hard to find somebody who's both. You know, there's plenty of people who are great scholars, but to find somebody who's, you know, sort of a kind, you know, caring mentor, good human being on top of being a great scholar, it's a harder combination to get than you might expect. You know, sometimes people are great scholars because they've invested no energy into caring about people or developing people skills. Now, you may not be aware of this because at CMU, people like that get the boot pretty quickly. In fact, they try to hire. But if you don't give a damn about your students, about your teaching, you know, they don't keep you around here. What else did you see? Book 5.
I
John?
was just gonna say that I have pretty much the exact same interaction with my mom whenever I try and go visit home and then come back here.
You sneak away without telling her?
I give her some kind of explanation as to why I need to be back here sooner.
Well, you know, it's tricky. I mean, when you go home, it's good to see your family, but speaking as a parent, it's very hard to wrap your idea around wrap your head around the idea that your children are adults. Remember, your parents had to change your diapers and probably had to tell you things like, no, don't eat that rock, don't eat dirt. Yeah, I mean, they had to teach you things that were just so beyond basic. So it's hard for them to take you seriously as an adult, even if you become an adult, even if you become a pretty well-functioning adult. So I know when we go home, it becomes very, you know, it's not always fun to be interacted with that way. You know, it's like I'm not eight anymore. I remember one interaction I had with one of my parents. I was 30. I was in grad school. I was a homeowner. And my parents told me how to lock the door. And it was like a normal door where like the little like thing like points perpendicular instead of parallel to the ground. It was like every other door in the world. Like, oh, I've never locked. I mean, it's just like, you know, this is a skill I developed when I was 8. I had this skill. It was just mind-boggling that my parent felt like they needed to tell me this. I'm like, not only do I own a door like that in my house, but I own many doors like that in my house. But again, then I try to remind myself, she changed my diaper, she probably took me out to dirt, you know, and then you remember, yeah. So is that what's going on there? Yeah. Well, and it's always challenging, like when you're like Augustine and you're not living the way that your parents really want you to. You know, they feel the need to tell you that again and again and again. And that's not a fun conversation. I can see that too. And, you know, hopefully I'll be better when my kids are that age, but we'll see. Hopefully I won't be like George Costanza's parents who specialize in telling them what at this point. Because that's not the basis for a positive relationship with your adult kids. Other reactions to book 5? Matt?
I thought it was interesting how Ambrose and Faustus were kind of foils to each other in a way.
Yes, good catch.
Like how Faustus doesn't really have any real truth behind what he's preaching. He just kind of talks in circles and kind of dodges out of answering any real questions that would cause problems when he's trying to preach. He says, well, I don't really know enough about that, or he just talks in circles again. Whereas he says that Ambrose, while he wasn't a good speaker, he was much more to the point and didn't have to kind of dance around it because what he was preaching was true.
Mm-hmm.
I just found that very interesting.
Now, there's a second way the two are foils to each other. Despite lacking substance, Augustine basically communicates Faustus is a really nice, approachable, likable guy. In contrast, Ambrose is sort of wise, but he comes across a bit aloof. You know, he's hard to approach. So again, the two are kind of used as foils for each other. And one wonders if the conversion would have happened in this chapter had Ambrose been a little more approachable. But yes, good catch seeing how those two characters are very much foils.
It said he kind of saw him as like a fatherly figure, So is that the kind of way where it's like, Faustus was more sort of a friend relationship, but Ambrose would be more like a father figure, so it's kind of like on a pedestal a little bit or above, sort of?
Well, surely in that culture, communicating the idea of a father figure is the highest of compliments. Yeah, I mean, there's something attractive about somebody who actually seems like they might know more than you.
And then when he's talking about Faustus, because he says he liked how he was very humble,
Mhm.
honest about the things he didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
Is that coming from Augustine at the time, or current writing Augustine believing that modesty is good?
I think it's both. I mean, look, I know a sentence that a lot of professors don't know. I'm capable of saying, I don't know. Some of my previous mentors made sure I knew how to say that sentence. Because, look, here's something terrible about your professors. Let me let the dirt out. We are not experts on everything. What we're actually experts on are usually, one or two very focused points. Now, a guy like me that teaches critical thinking and logic, I mean, I might have something to say more broadly, but still, nobody's an expert on everything. And there are few things as disillusioning as hearing someone who's presenting themselves as smart affirm things that you realize just are off. So the I don't know move is a much better move. Just from a viewpoint of persuasion. A, and B, if somebody's willing to say, I don't know, when they really don't know, even if you wouldn't have caught them, it usually gives you more reason to take them seriously when they do say things. So, being able to say, I don't know, I think that's very credibility building. So long as the thing that they don't know isn't something that they really should know. And that's really the problem with Faustus is, if he's going to be the high-ranking bishop in the Manichaean religion, if he's the one that everyone's building up to, don't worry, the guy with the answers is going to come. I mean, it's great that he admits that he doesn't have those answers. But dang, he wanted those answers, right? So this is why I'm always of two minds when people want to introduce me whenever I'm speaking. I'd rather be undersold at the beginning and then be impressive than have somebody oversell me and fall a little bit short. So yeah, it's those same sort of dynamics.
There's the I don't know move, and then there's the I don't know anything move of Socrates. Be held accountable for anything.
Well, the funny thing about Socrates is he seems to say it tongue-in-cheek a lot of the time, where, he sure has a hell of a lot of things to say for a guy that claims not to know anything. Much in the same way, people misuse the word agnostic in our culture. Agnostic means you don't know certain things. Agnostic is not identical to a position. So I often point out to people, just because you're agnostic about whether or not God exists, that doesn't mean you shouldn't believe in God. That just means you should be much less certain and much more humble about it than somebody who thinks there's evidence for it. But from I don't know, you can say, well, I don't know if Tom Brady's going to win the next Super Bowl, but I might place a large bet on it. I mean, so just because you don't know doesn't mean doesn't mean that you need to move to the negative position on that. There might be very compelling reasons to say, well, I don't know, but I think, or I don't know, but I guess, or I don't know, but I hope. But in our culture we use agnostic as sort of a lazy man's atheist, and I think that move's kind of illegitimate. Anything else? Book 5. Introductory thoughts on book 5?
I could start off on chapter 1.
Yeah, why don't you tell me your chapter 1 thought?
I really enjoyed that it was so short. But I think throughout the whole thing, but especially maybe 4 lines down, he really comes back to or juxtaposes his original position in the first 2 books, where he's saying, like, God is everywhere, no matter if man turns away from you, or whatnot, which is very, very different from what he thought was going on when he was a teen and in his 20s, where he thought God was being completely silent to him. And that's just the first thing I thought of when I read that, of him truly acknowledging that God is always interacting in the same.
Yeah, no, I mean, another interesting thing again about the chapter 1 here is, this is when these things are introduced as books, but these were solid breaks and scrolls, and it was natural to do sort of a mini reintroduction from time to time like this. And to just sort of affirm God's presence and activity throughout all creation. I believe it was Buber who said, it's not that God is silent or, it's not that God isn't there to be seen, it's that our eyes are blinded by a cataract. So that's kind of the sentiment here with Augustine. All right, let's see. All right, so in chapter 3 here, again, he's talking about his 29th year where he gets sort of fully disillusioned with the Manichaean religion. This is, as I said in my introductory remarks, the problem here is that Faustus has been, too many questions have gone unanswered, and too many promises have been made about what Faustus is going to do. So Faustus comes into town, and he's a nice guy, he knows a couple of things, but he can't answer the hard questions that Augustine has been harboring about the Manichaean religion, and especially, you should look at this at the second paragraph in chapter 3. The many doctrines of the philosophers, when he compares them to the fables of Manichaeans, what he's referring to there is most likely the philosophical models of astronomy. So Aristotle and Ptolemy had made a model for explaining the solar system. Frankly, it's the one that Galileo disproved. But they had this Earth-centered account of the solar system. And, there was like data and reasons to believe it. And the Manichaeans' account of astronomy was just, not compatible with what one could observe. So he meets Faustus and he wants an explanation for why Manichaean astronomy just seems bonkers and not to fit what's been reasoned to in philosophy mathematically and through the crude science of the sort of philosophical astronomers. And Faustus doesn't have anything good to say about it. He doesn't have the answers. So this is deeply disillusioning for Augustine. So if you see, again, a little further down in chapter 3, it's marked subsection 4 in my book. Talking about the ancient philosophers, by their own minds and by that ingenuity with which you endowed them, they investigated these matters of astronomy and made many discoveries. Many years in advance, they foretold eclipses of the great luminaries, the sun and the moon, telling them what day and what hour, to what extent they would be. Their calculations did not fail them. The events proved as they had foretold. So again, the best ancient scientists were associated with philosophy. I mean, it was philosophy. And they had accurately predicted certain astronomical events, especially eclipses. And the accounts of astronomy that the Manichaeans were given were incompatible with this. Advantage philosophy, disadvantage Manichaeism. So hopefully Faustus is going to give good answers, but he does not. So out of an impious mind, they fall back from you. Now, let's see. Now here, I think he goes on to somewhat criticize the philosophers, though, and he uses some very artistic language. Out of an impious pride, they fall back from you and suffer an eclipse of your lights, So early can they foresee a coming eclipse of the sun, but their own present eclipse they do not see, for they do not seek with a devout mind. Whence it is that they possess the skill by which they seek out these things. So he's playing with words, eclipse of the mind and the heart. They can see the eclipse in the skies and predict that, but they're unaware of the eclipse within their own reason. So this is a recurring theme in Augustine, the great knowledge and intellect held by the ancient philosophers, but the great pride and accompanying foolishness that he at the same time attributes to them. Later on, he will describe a Platonist as one puffed up with unnatural pride. And it's one of my favorite descriptions of a philosopher anywhere. Just like, wow. And at the same time, again, I'm in the discipline. I've met some guys like that. On a few days, I may have been that guy. So, yeah. But, a certain kind of pride sometimes comes from being smart and being right on some things. All right, chapter 3, paragraph, subsection 5. But they did not know the way your word, by which you made the things that they number off, and themselves who number, and the sense by which they discern what they number, and the intellect by which they number. To your wisdom there is no number. The only begotten himself is made to us wisdom and justice and sanctification. And he has been numbered among us, and he has paid tribute to Caesar. And they have not known this way by which they may descend from themselves to him, and through him ascend up to him. They have not known this way, and they think themselves to be lifted up to the stars and to the shining lights, and lo, they plunge down to the earth, and their foolish heart is darkened over. That's a reference to Romans chapter 1. They say many true things of your creation, but he who is truth, the artificer of creation, they do not seek in piety, therefore they do not find him. Or if they do find him and acknowledge him to be God, they do not honor him as God or give him thanks. They become vain in their thoughts and profess themselves to be wise by attributing to themselves the things that are yours. In this wise, in a most perverse blindness, they strive to attribute to you even their own deeds, that is, to put their lies upon you. You are the truth to change the glory of the incorruptible God into the likeness of an image of a corruptible man with birds, four-footed beasts, and creeping things. They change your truth into a lie. They worship and serve the creature rather than the creator. So he is, again, shift. So, I wonder, I have to wonder how much of this is political here. I mean, because he's done something, sort of politically dangerous by praising the ancient philosophers, the ancient pagan philosophers, quite a lot. So, it's kind of like in our recent political culture, if you ever said something nice about Trump, you then had to say like 3 bad things about him so that the people around you didn't jump you or something. I mean, it's because, there were things one might have praised, like the No New Wars thing. But you then had to turn around and immediately assure people, no, I'm still on your side and stuff. But he's kind of doing the same thing there. I mean, as a bishop, if you're going to say something nice about the pagan philosophers, you then have to, he says like 3 sentences of nice things and like 3 paragraphs of artistic things, criticizing them. And he even associates them with idolatry, which I think is a little unfair. I mean, a lot of them did not advocate the idol worship. I mean, they were associated with cultures that engaged in idol worship, which many of the philosophers, were at least ambivalent about it. So, but yeah, so he reads them the Romans 1, gives them the Romans 1 treatment. Yeah, Matt?
The last line of that section, the serve the creature rather than the creator, and worship and serve the creature, that kind of seems almost a little bit like some of the stuff you said about Manichaeans, where it's kind of like they believe the divine's like in the physical realm rather than the actual, just like metaphysical, like saying how like God is, figs or something like that, as those kind of.
Yeah, I think it's either a direct quote or a paraphrase of Romans 1 as well. And this is a repeated biblical criticism of idolaters, is not only do they serve that which is created, but they serve that which they know is created because they were, they know that idol is temporary and was carved by a man, or, that statue was carved by a human. So that's a recurring criticism that occurs in both Old and New Testaments about idol worship. I kept in memory many true things said by these men concerning the creation back to the philosophers, and I found proof of them based on mathematical calculations, the orderly succession of the seasons, and the visible testimony of the stars. I compared them with the pronouncements of Mani, who in the course of his ravings had written very extensively on these matters, but in his works I found no explanation of the solstice, equinoxes, or the eclipse of the greater lights, and nothing such as I had learned in the books on natural philosophy. But I was ordered to believe these things he wrote, and this belief did not agree with those proofs established by math and by my own eyes, which are different. So, unanswered questions, a conflict between what's noble through reason and the supposed revelation of Mani, and it's intention. Let's see, moving on to chapter 4. There's nothing really new in chapter 4. I mean, there's more in here that seems to criticize the idolatrous cultures that Greco-Roman philosophy emerged from. Chapter 5, we've got more on Mani. There is, in the second half of chapter 5, criticisms of Christians who aren't well learned in other topics. When I hear this or that brother Christian who's ignorant of these subjects, astronomy, philosophy, and the like, and thinks one thing in place of another, I can regard such a man with patience as he gives his opinion. I cannot see how it will harm him if he is perhaps in ignorance with regard to the position or condition of some corporeal creature, as long as he does believe things unworthy of you, O Lord, creator of all things. However, it seems like there should be a nod there somewhere. I don't see it. However, it is harmful to him if he thinks that this belongs to the very essence of religious teaching and optionally presumes to assert what he is ignorant of. Such weakness in the cradle days of a man's faith is put up with by Charity, our mother, until this new man grows up into a perfect man. No more to be carried about with every wind of doctrine. That's another reference to all the epistles. But as to that one who dares to become a teacher, and the authority of the leader, and the prince of those whom he could persuade to such things, so that his followers thought that they followed not a mere man, but the Holy Spirit, who would not deem that in him such madness should be detested and totally rejected, when once he had been convicted of making false statements. But I had not as yet clearly determined whether the changes of the long and shorter days and nights, and of day itself and night itself, and the waning of the stars, and any other thing of this kind that I've read in other books, could also be explained in keeping with his words. For if by any chance they could, it would still be uncertain to me whether the things were or not, or so or not. However, because of the supposed insanctity of the man, I could advance his authority to support my belief. So should Christians care about things in science? Augustine's answer is yes. So Christians should not be quick to be dismissive of science they shouldn't be quick to think it refutes some important thing in Christianity. But a lot of this makes me think of the way some people treat the topic of evolution. If evolution is true, I don't think it changes anything. And in fact, we're going to see when he talks about St. Ambrose is going to explain lots of the Old Testament allegorically. And in particular, he's referring to the creation stories. So, and later in the book, I forget if it's book 11 or 12, we're going to even get Augustine's allegorical interpretation of Genesis. So the idea that allegory is some sort of heresy, I mean, well, allegorical interpretation has been around a very long time. I mean, it was around literally before Augustine, at least in Ambrose. I guarantee Ambrose wasn't the first one to come up with it. So yeah, allegorical interpretation certainly of Genesis has been around for at least 1,600 plus years. So Christians should be a lot more comfortable with that possibility. A, and B, everyone should also realize that allegorical interpretations of Genesis are not some ad hoc thing invented to try to deal with evolution. Because, that's, again, these things were around for, 1,500 years before anybody thought evolution was possibly true. So I think there's some really important principles in here that are germane to things people struggle with today. Okay, chapter 6. For almost 9 years, during which my errant mind had hearkened to these men, I waited his content long to become Faustus. I found that he was gracious and pleasant in his conversations, skipping down a little bit, and that on the topics on which they usually speak, he could talk long much more agreeably. But how could the most comely cupbearer help to slake my first or more precious drinks? My ears already had enough of such things. They did not seem the better to me because better expressed, nor true because eloquent, nor was his soul wise because he looked that way and had a suitable flow of words. The men who had made me such promises about him were not good judges of things, and therefore he appeared wise and prudent to them because his speech was pleasing to them. All right, so as I said, Faustus was built up too much. When he spoke on the topics that were sort of the area that the Manichees were strong in, he seemed even better than usual, but he still couldn't speak to the issues of astronomy and the ancient philosophers. So yeah, he's going to become disillusioned. Let's see, what else do we need? Do we need to talk more about Faustus? All right, let's push on to chapter 8. You worked within me so that I might be persuaded to go to Rome and to teach there rather than at Carthage. How I was persuaded to do this, I will not neglect to confess, for in all this both the most hidden depths of your providence and your mercy are near at hand to give us must be thought upon and planned. I did not want to go to Rome because greater stipends and greater honors were promised to me by friends who urged me to go on this, although such things also influenced my mind at the time. The greatest, almost the sole reason, was because I heard that the young men studied there in a much more peaceful way, and they kept quiet by the restraints of a better order and discipline. They were not allowed to rush insolently at random into the classroom of the teacher with whom they were not enrolled, nor were they let in at all unless he gave permission. So yeah, look, number one frustration of teachers, especially K-12 teachers, unruly students. Even one or two troubled students in your class can dominate your teaching energy. And amongst professors, one thing that attracts professors' places when they have a choice, they'd rather teach better students. It's more fun to teach students who are attentive.
So does it happen often when you have a class where in a college setting where it's disruptive students, right?
I've never really had that problem. But yeah, I mean, usually on the college level, if people don't care, they just don't come. But you do have students in the back that are not overtly unruly, but they're on their devices or watching something on their computer screen. The worst case I've ever witnessed personally, there was an adjunct I was evaluating, and she could not keep her class's attention. And I felt bad for her. But she had a student in the front row who was live streaming a soccer match. And of course, when somebody in the front row live streams a soccer match, everybody behind them is watching a soccer match. So, yeah, I mean, that was just not good. So, I mean, that's not quite, outwardly disruptive. I've never seen that here. But that was pretty bad behavior on the student's part. Pre-COVID, I used to joke that I run an Amish classroom because I basically said, I don't want to see your devices. I mean, largely in reaction to what I saw there. And because I when I've evaluated adjuncts, I've sat in the back row and I see what everybody does on the computer. And you all know what they do on the computer. And, and I wasn't unrealistic. I expected people to check their email. But I didn't expect video games, Minesweeper, and Solitaire, and YouTube, and live stream soccer matches. So this was.
Did you say anything, or did you just?
I let the teacher know afterwards. But, I mean, it was the World Cup. If the student cared that much about the World Cup, he should have just stayed home. I get, or at the very least, I've sometimes had this policy. If you want to use your devices, sit in the back row, and I don't care what you do. Because, if you live stream a soccer game, it's just going to distract you. And, you're the one paying for this education. If that's the level of education you want, half professor, half soccer game. I mean, okay. I don't get paid more if you get a good grade or if I hold your attention. But all that to say, I have known professors, not that they had unruly students, but they had mediocre students. And I knew a guy that had a permanent job, but the only class that philosophy offered was low-level, informal critical thinking. And that class, I taught that class, and that class just isn't fun. It's not fun. I'd much rather dive deep into Augustine or Phil Religion or ethics or philosophy in the movies, but critical thinking is just boring. I mean, yeah, it's at a certain point, as you didn't get, nobody gets a PhD thinking, I sure hope I can teach critical thinking 4 times a semester for the next 25 years. That's not what we want.
I had it for an AM, and it was rough.
That's a good cure for insomnia, isn't it?
There was no.
I believe that. So and in particular, I don't know if it's in this chapter, but he mentions that not only do the students in Rome, not only were they more orderly, but the students where he was at Carthage were dishonest, and they had this stupid system for payment where you pay when the course was complete. So 2 classes before the last class, they'd all drop the class. I think you wouldn't have to be a 21st century person to think, maybe we need to have them pay up front, or at least have them pay half up front or something. Pay when they enter the class each time or something.
For how universities work, was it kind of like how it was, back in the day, how it was you just go to a lecture just because, some people would go go to an anatomy lecture, things like that, we just pay for a ticket sort of thing.
I'm not sure at this specific time what all the details are. I think there is. I don't think you were free to just sort of take what you wanted quite to that degree. I think it was more maybe the way you get tutored with an instrument. Yeah, okay, you can take a week off, but you're not going to skip a lot if you want to be good, and especially if you want that to be your vocational skill. And the people going here want that to be their vocational skill. All right, so yeah, then here's the thing where he leaves town without letting his mother say goodbye. Why did he do that? Yeah, I mean, I think, oh, okay, I see what. She wants him to go back home, and he wants to go to Rome. So he leaves town, he jumps town, so that, you know, she's gonna stop trying to like make a scene at the dock.
So
And
why, in that same paragraph of during the night I secretly set out, he says God doesn't care about her sorrow, and rejected her desires and come home.
yeah, what was it, my God, that she sought from you with so many tears, except that you would not let me sail away? But in your deepest counsels you heard the crux of her desires. You had no care for what she then sought, so that you might do for me what she forever sought. So look, there's a difference sometimes between what you think you want and what you want more deeply. So what Monica wants more than anything is for Augustine to convert to Catholicism, marry a nice Catholic girl, and give her some grandbabies. That's what she really wants. And she thinks the way to do that is to get Augustine to go home with her. But Augustine said, God heard her prayer. The big prayer was that, you know, he come to faith in Christ and convert to Catholicism. And so the end goal God granted, but not the means according to Monica's immediate agenda. So that's what he's saying. God cares about the end, not the means, in this situation.
And this is kind of more speculating, but would she have acknowledged his other kid? Or is that more like a societal question for back then?
I mean, it's a kid out of wedlock. I mean, it's a complex question. I think the long story short is it's not the same. I'm not sure if it's that the child goes unacknowledged. And here I confess to not being enough of an expert on the background culture here to say with certainty. I think it's safe to say it's not the same. But it's interesting. There's no story of interactions here between Monica, Augustine's son, and Augustine's concubine. So that makes me think that either because of the culture or because of Monica in particular, that this just isn't going to be a good thing. Whereas later, he's going to talk about trying to get betrothed, and Monica's very excited. So, you know, the world hasn't changed that much in 16, 1700 years. All right, so he gets to Rome, but he's sick at Rome, but he recovers very articulately. If you go to chapter 10, in section 19 of chapter 10, he embraces a group he refers to as the academics. A better word there would have been he embraces the skeptics. So the thought arose in me that those philosophers whom they called the academics were wiser than the rest, the skeptics. They were of the opinion that all things are doubtful, and that they decreed that no truth could be apprehended by man. To me, they clearly seemed to believe this, as it is commonly held, although I did not yet understand the meaning. I did not fail to restrain my host from over-credulity, which I knew him to have concerning those favorite topics with which the Manichaean books are filled. Yet I lived in closer friendship with them than with other men who do not belong to that heresy. All right, so he no longer believes in Manichaeism, but he's still their friend. I mean, you know, that makes sense. Sometimes, you know, people are part of the community more than, you know, so he's a social Manichaean rather than one by faith. All right, at the end of that section 19, to me, it seemed a most base thing to believe that you have the shape of our human flesh and are bounded by the outward lines of our bodily members. I wished to meditate upon my God, but I did not know how to think of him except as a masked form where I thought that anything not a body was nothing whatsoever. This was the greatest and almost the sole cause of my ethical error. So he doesn't yet have a category for immaterial things, immaterial substances. And the Platonists are going to give him that category. So that's going to be one of the important things that the Platonists provide, is that they have a category, a concept of immaterial form. And that's going to give Augustine a model for something that's truly a thing, that's not a physical thing, and he's going to sort of use this as a stepping stone towards reasoning towards the possibility, the conceivability of God. I mean, because, isn't that what one of the moves contemporary skeptics make? I mean, to believe in God is like believing in the tooth fairy. I mean, so if you don't have a concept for non-corporeal things, if you take the whole thing, if you don't have a category for that, it's easy to just lump God into this category of nonsense. All right, so I guess we're at time here. We'll have time to discuss the last couple chapters of Book 5 on Wednesday, along with the accompanying readings. All right. Thank you all.
So when we read the word God in Plato's writings or Aristotle's, older works, what are they referring to?
Good question. Depends on context. I mean, it can refer to something like a Greek text.
Okay.
I mean, for Plato, he does have the concept of the demiurge in the Timaeus, which is a sort of primordial creator. And there he seems to think there's only one. So that might be the closest any of them come to our, Judeo-Christian God. And then in Aristotle, you've got the unmoved mover, which isn't really a supernatural thing, but it is sort of a foundational, explanatory thing that serves a purpose much like that. But you can ask that question again on Wednesday. Maybe I'll give you that answer.
When you evaluate there's a whole lot of different stuff lying around for different heritages and groups.
Sure.
I think it was almost better that there was all that going on when he was there for his kind of development faith, or if it had been unified, it would have been easier sort of.
Well, why how so?
Well, there was a lot more discourse going on between different groups. So I was wondering if that might have had a different impact on him than if it was more unified